"You've never contributed a dime to this family," my father said, setting down his scotch with enough force to make the ice cubes rattle. 32 years old and you're still just a leech, taking up space, living off everyone else's hard work." The entire birthday dinner table went silent, my stepmother Karen, my half-brothers Mitchell and Grant, even the catering staff hovering near the kitchen door seemed to freeze. I looked at my father, at his red face and expensive suit, at the Rolex on his wrist and the certainty in his eyes, and I said very quietly, "You're right." $1,000 in medical expenses through a private foundation I.D. established specifically to keep him alive, and I was about to pull every single dollar. The dinner was held at my father's estate in Greenwich, Connecticut, the kind of old money property with a circular driveway and actual columns. 50 people had come to celebrate Richard Hartwell's 65th birthday, all of them dressed in cocktail attire, all of them wealthy enough that the $500 per plate catering felt casual. I'd worn jeans and a blazer. It was a small rebellion, but the only kind I allowed myself anymore. "I'm serious, Nora," Dad continued, apparently not satisfied with the initial blow. "Your brothers have real careers. Mitchell's at Goldman, Grant just made partner at his firm. What do you do? Volunteer work? That's not a contribution, that's a hobby people with trust funds indulge in." "I don't have a trust fund," I said. "Exactly my point. Your mother had the good sense to leave her money in a proper trust, and you've been living off the interest for a decade. Contributing nothing, producing nothing, just existing." Karen, my stepmother, touched his arm. "Richard, maybe not tonight." "No, she needs to hear this. The family needs to hear this." He stood up, and I realized with a sinking feeling that he was about to make a speech. "I've built something real. Hartwell Industries employs 3,000 people. We manufacture components that go into medical devices, equipment that saves lives. That's contribution. That's legacy. What's your legacy going to be, Nora? A nice obituary about how you volunteered at soup kitchens." Mitchell laughed into his wine glass. Grant didn't even bother hiding his smirk. "I work at a nonprofit," I said quietly. "Healthcare advocacy." "Healthcare advocacy," Dad repeated, like the words tasted bad. "Let me guess, you help people navigate insurance paperwork? File claims? That's not a career, that's administrative work. A high school graduate could do that." Actually, I was the executive director of the Riverside Health Foundation, a nonprofit I.D. founded 8 years ago that helped patients with catastrophic medical conditions access experimental treatments and clinical trials. We'd helped over 2,000 patients, secured $47 million in compassionate use medications, and pioneered a model that 3 other organizations had since replicated. But I'd learned not to defend myself at family dinners. "The point is," Dad said, returning to his seat and his scotch, "some people contribute to society, and some people just take. It's time you figured out which kind of person you want to be." I stood up, folding my napkin carefully. "I need to make a phone call." "Excuse me." "Running away, as usual," Mitchell muttered. I walked out to the garden, where the spring air was cool and I could hear the distant sound of Long Island Sound. I pulled out my phone and called my attorney. "David, it's Nora Hartwell. I need you to do something for me first thing Monday morning." "Of course. What do you need?" "The Riverside Foundation has been covering medical expenses for a patient under grant number RHF 2016-04. I want that funding terminated immediately. Withdraw all support, effective end of business Monday." There was a pause. "Nora, that's your father's case. The cancer treatment protocol, the clinical trial enrollment, all of it. Are you sure?" "Completely sure." "Do you want me to notify him directly?" "No. Let his medical team handle it. They'll inform him when the payments stop clearing." "Understood. I'll draft the termination paperwork tonight." I hung up and stood in the garden for a long time, looking at the lights of the house, listening to the laughter and conversation drifting through the open windows. 8 years ago, my father had been diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The prognosis had been grim, maybe 6 months, probably less. The standard treatment options had failed within weeks. He'd been preparing to die. I'd been 24, fresh out of grad school with a master's in public health, working as a research coordinator at Yale New Haven Hospital. I'd used my connections at the hospital to find an experimental immunotherapy trial. I'd navigated the FDA's compassionate use protocols. I'd paid for treatments that insurance wouldn't cover, medications that cost $40,000 per dose, monitoring and scans and specialist consultations. For 8 years, I'd kept him alive. And I'd never told him. Not because I wanted to be noble or selfless, but because I knew exactly what would happen if I did. He'd dismiss it, minimize it, find some way to make it about himself. He'd say I was just spending my mother's money, that anyone could write checks, that it wasn't real work. So I'd kept it anonymous, routing everything through the foundation, making sure his medical team only knew that a healthcare advocacy nonprofit had taken his case. He thought he'd been lucky, that some bureaucrat had seen his file and decided he qualified for assistance. He had no idea his daughter had spent her entire inheritance keeping him alive. The party continued without me. I stayed in the garden until the catering staff started packing up, until the guests began leaving, until only family remained inside, probably talking about what a disappointment I was. I drove back to my apartment in New Haven, a modest one-bedroom near the hospital where I still put in 60-hour weeks despite Dad's belief that I spent my days filling out forms. Monday morning, David called to confirm the funding termination had been processed. The hospital's billing department has been notified. They'll contact the patient within 72 hours. Thank you. Nora, can I ask why you're doing this? Because he's right. I don't contribute. So I'm going to stop taking up space in his life. On Wednesday, my phone rang. Unknown number, but a Greenwich area code. Nora, it's Karen. My stepmother's voice was shaking. There's been a problem with your father's treatment. The hospital called. They said the funding program he's been enrolled in has been discontinued. Without it, we're looking at $180,000 a month in out-of-pocket costs. The insurance won't cover most of it because it's experimental. We need to figure something out. That sounds difficult, I said. The doctors said without this treatment protocol, he has maybe 6 months. Maybe less. The cancer will come back. I'm sorry to hear that. Nora, I'm calling everyone in the family. We're trying to figure out if we can afford to continue the treatment privately. Mitchell and Grant are looking into loan options. I know you and your father had words at the dinner, but this is life or death. Can you contribute anything? I thought I never contributed anything. That's not, Nora, please. This is your father's life. I know exactly what it is. I'm sorry, Karen, but I don't have anything to offer. You have your mother's trust fund, which I spent 8 years ago. Good luck with the loans. I hung up. By Friday, my half-brothers had both called. Mitchell was aggressive, demanding I step up for once in my life. Grant was more manipulative, talking about family obligation and how disappointed Mom would be. I told them both the same thing, I had nothing to contribute. On Saturday, my father called. Nora. His voice was different, smaller somehow. We need to talk. About what? The medical situation. Karen explained what's happening with the treatment funding. I may have been harsh at the dinner. I was drinking, it was a long day, I didn't mean, you meant every word, I said calmly. You think I'm a leech. You think I contribute nothing. You're probably right. I'm asking for help. And I'm declining to provide it. Which, according to you, is what I've always done anyway. Nora, I'm dying. We're all dying, Dad. Some of us just have better insurance. How can you be so cold? I laughed, and it surprised both of us. Cold? Dad, for 8 years I've worked 70-hour weeks at a non-profit that barely pays me $60,000 a year. I've lived in a one-bedroom apartment, driven a 15-year-old car, skipped vacations, and eaten rice and beans for dinner because I spent every available dollar building something that could help people like you. And you know what you said when I told you I worked in healthcare advocacy? You said a high school graduate could do my job. I didn't know. No, you didn't. You never asked. You just assumed. There was a long silence on the line. The Riverside Health Foundation, he said finally. That's yours, isn't it? What gave it away? I looked up the funding that was terminated. The foundation's address is in New Haven. The executive director's name is listed as N. Hartwell. I thought it was a coincidence, but it's not a coincidence. You've been paying for my treatment. This whole time. I was paying for it. Past tense. The funding ended Monday. Because of what I said at dinner. Because you were right. I was contributing nothing. So I stopped. Nora, please. Do you want to know the really funny part, Dad? When Mom died and left me that money, you told me to invest it wisely, to build something stable. So I did. I spent every dollar establishing a foundation that's helped over 2,000 people access life-saving treatments. I've negotiated with pharmaceutical companies, navigated FDA protocols, built relationships with research hospitals across the country. I've contributed more to healthcare in 8 years than most people do in a lifetime. But because I don't wear expensive suits or work in finance, you decided I was worthless. I was wrong. You were honest. There's a difference. What can I do? What do you want me to do? I thought about that. What did I want? An apology? A confession in front of the family? Some grand gesture of remorse? Nothing, I said finally. I don't want you to do anything. So you're just going to let me die? I'm going to let you figure out how to save yourself. The same way I've been figuring things out for 32 years without your help or approval. The treatment costs $180,000 a month. I can't afford that. Then liquidate some assets. Sell the summer house. Tap your retirement accounts. Ask Mitchell and Grant for loans. Those are all things people do when they're trying to survive. You know what you're asking is impossible. No more impossible than what you asked of me. You wanted me to contribute. Well, I contributed 8 years of my life and my entire inheritance. Now it's someone else's turn. I hung up. The next week was quiet. No calls, no texts, no attempts to reach me. I went to work, met with patients, reviewed grant applications, and tried not to think about what was happening in Greenwich. On Thursday, David called. Your father's attorneys reached out. They want to negotiate. Negotiate what? Continuation of the medical funding in exchange for a formal apology and acknowledgement of your work. They're prepared to put it in writing. Tell them no. Nora. This isn't about an apology, David. This is about the fact that my father spent my entire adult life treating me like a failure, and the only thing that's changing his mind is self-preservation. I don't need his acknowledgement. I never did. What do you need? I thought about that question for a long time. What did I need? What would make any of this feel right? I need him to understand that contribution isn't measured in salary or status. That the people he dismisses, the ones doing unglamorous work in nonprofits and advocacy and care, they're contributing more than he ever has. I need him to understand that building a medical device company that profits from suffering is not more valuable than helping people access care they couldn't otherwise afford. I can't negotiate that understanding, David said gently. I know. That's why the funding stays terminated. But on Friday night, I got an email from my father. No subject line, just a message. I've been thinking about what you said. About contribution. I looked up the Riverside Foundation's work. I read the case studies, the patient testimonials, the journal articles about your advocacy model. You've saved lives, Nora. Real lives. More than my company ever has. I've spent 30 years building a business that makes components for machines. You've spent 8 years fighting for people who had no other options. One of us is a leech, but it's not you. I'm not asking for the funding back. I don't deserve it. I just wanted you to know that I see what you built. I see what you contributed. And I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner. I'm going to sell the Greenwich house and the Florida condo. That should cover about 2 years of treatment, maybe more. If I live longer than that, I'll figure something else out. And I'm making a donation to the Riverside Foundation, $500,000, unrestricted funds, to be used for patients who need it. Not to buy back your approval. Not to save myself. Because your work deserves support, even if I don't. I'm proud of you. I should have said that years ago. Dad. I read the email 3 times, then sat at my kitchen table staring at my phone. David called 10 minutes later. Did you see the email? Yes. There's more. He's putting the donation in writing. $500,000, no strings attached. Nora, that's going to change what your foundation can do. I know. So what do you want to do? I thought about my father, about the man who'd called me a leech, who'd dismissed my work as administrative paperwork, who'd spent 8 years accepting help he didn't know came from me. I thought about the 2,000 patients we'd helped, the ones still waiting for assistance, the treatments we couldn't afford to fund, the clinical trials we couldn't access. Accept the donation, I said. Use it for other patients. People who actually need it. And your father's treatment? He said he'll figure it out. I believe him. You're really going to let him handle this himself? Yes. Because that's what contribution looks like. It's not about writing checks because you can. It's about making hard choices, sacrificing comfort, fighting for something bigger than yourself. He's never had to do that. Maybe it's time he learned. 6 months later, my father was still alive. He'd sold both properties, liquidated some investments, and was paying for his treatment privately. It was bankrupting him slowly, but he was surviving. We had coffee once a month now, brief meetings where we talked about the foundation's work, about his treatment progress, about nothing important and everything that mattered. At one of these meetings, he said, I've been telling people about your foundation. About what you do. Why? Because I spent 30 years bragging about my company, about my success, about the legacy I was building. I never once mentioned what you built. I'm trying to correct that. You don't have to. I know. But I want to. Mitchell called me last week. He's thinking about leaving Goldman, maybe doing something more meaningful. Grant's been volunteering at a legal aid clinic. They're watching what you've done, Nora. What you've always been doing. I didn't know what to say to that. You taught me something, he continued. Real contribution isn't loud. It doesn't come with plaques or corner offices. It's quiet, consistent work that helps people nobody else is helping. That's legacy. That's what matters. You had to almost die to learn that? He smiled, tired but genuine. Some lessons cost more than others. The Riverside Foundation is still running. We helped 287 patients last year, including 12 who were in similar situations to my father, catastrophic diagnoses, failed standard treatments, experimental options they couldn't access alone. I still drive my old car and live in my small apartment. I still work 70-hour weeks for $60,000 a year. And I still think about that birthday dinner, about my father's certainty that I contributed nothing, about how wrong people can be when they measure worth in money and status instead of impact. Sometimes the people who contribute most are the ones nobody notices. Until suddenly, everyone does.